Okay, maybe we can start with the overview. Since we have people joining, I think that maybe we can spend a few minutes talking about the introduction of this session. So welcome everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, or good night. Thank you for joining in this fourth webinar of the Resilient Interest Group. As some of you may know, we have been working on this resilience interest group since last year, and so this is our last webinar of this first phase of this TCLP 2020 work plan. Our webinar of today, we name it Private Sector Engagement for Resilience to Catalyze Transformational Change at the local level. And we hope this is a very interesting topic for everyone. The next one, Maria Jose, please. The next one. Thank you. So the meeting objectives of today, the main objective of today's webinar is to showcase areas where the International Finances Corporation, the IFC, has successfully worked with the private sector at the local level. In particular, representatives of the IFC and selected country-based business will share their experience in promoting climate resilience of farming communities through the engagement of the private sector in Nepal and Bangladesh. These are base projects supported by the PPCR of the Climate Investment Funds. For that purpose, as you saw at the beginning, we have structured the session in 4 parts. The first, welcome and overview. Then we will have presentations on Nepal and Bangladesh case studies, for which we will have 3 speakers, one from the IFC and 2 from the private sector. We will introduce them later during the session. And then as always, we want to hear from participants, so about their experience and lessons learned. That's why we will have a fireside chat and a Q&A session, which will be led by Jose Pablo, who is part of the facilitation team. And then we're gonna wrap up and talk about next steps. Before we start, we want to highlight that the meeting is being recorded. Shelby Thomas, part of the facilitation team, will provide some logistics details and ground rules for the session. And then Lori Rufo from the Climate Investment Funds will give a brief introduction of the TCLP concepts and framework. And we think this will be very useful and helpful for the participants that are new in this session. So Shelby, maybe you can talk about ground rules.
Hello, nice to see everyone. As Carolina said, I'm Shelby Thomas. I'm here to provide technical support for Zoom. I'm going to just quickly cover some virtual meeting norms before handing it over to Lori for the TCLP overview. As you see on the screen, which we have, I'm sure everybody is already aware of, during this meeting, we are hoping to hear from as many people as possible, which can be hard when there's so many participants. So be conscientious about your airtime so that we can hear from as many people as possible. In general, please keep your microphone on mute when anybody else is speaking, so there's no background noise. You can use the button in the right corner of your screen to raise your hand. If you want to share, you can also use the chat box to put in any thoughts throughout presentations. We will be monitoring that. So there's a couple different ways for you to speak up. We encourage everyone to listen actively to other people's comments and provide responses when possible. Of course, we've never had an issue with a respectful discussion, but be mindful of other people's experiences and perspectives. And if you are having any challenges with Zoom, or if you have any technical questions, please feel free to chat me directly in the chat. And you can also reach out to Maria Jose if you'd like. I think that's it. Unless there are any questions, I can hand it over to Lori.
Thank you. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. I am Lori Rufo, the coordinator of the pilot program for climate resilience. Before I give you an overview of the Transformational Change Learning Partnership, let me greet everyone and hope that everyone is doing well and keeping healthy and safe. Thank you for your participation in this webinar. We have a very interesting topic today, and some very distinguished speakers who will talk about the engagement of private sector in adaptation and resilience. And before we introduce them to you, let me give you this brief history and overview of the TCLP, or the Transformational Change Learning Partnership. So as part of the SIF's mandate to serve as a learning laboratory for scaled-up climate finance, the SIF's Evaluation and Learning Initiative identifies strategic lessons across SIF's portfolio and enable learning that is timely, relevant, and applicable to climate programs, strategies, and investments. So in March 2017, the SIF established the Transformational Change Learning Partnership as part of its evaluation and learning initiative. And the objective is to facilitate a collaborative evidence-based learning process for SIF key stakeholders to develop a shared understanding of transformational change. So between 2017 and 2019, the Transformational Change Learning Partnership work on understanding of the concept of transformational change, and particularly the role of the SIF in contributing to transformational change since it was established in 2008, and also how climate finance could be more transformational. The TCLP's initial work in 2017 has focused on concepts and framework, and this has resulted into a working definition of transformational change, as you can see from the slide. And this working definition provided a practical way of thinking transformational change in the SIF context. And as you can also see from this slide, the TCLP also identified four dimensions that signals whether transformational change is happening and if transformational change is robust. One of the dimension is relevance. This refers to the strategic focus, design, and nimbleness of initiatives to enable transformation. The next one is systemic change, which refers to the fundamental shifts in systems, structures, and function. And then the next one is scale. So scale refers to large scale changes at the higher systems level, but we also account that small scale interventions at the local level can also bring huge transformational impacts. And the last is the sustainability as one of the dimensions, which refers to the robustness and the resilience of changes. In early 2020, the Transformational Change Learning Partnership also launched its most recent phase of work. And this particular scope of work includes global sharing of transformational change through webinars, the development of a number of case studies, and also the establishment of focus interest group, including the resilience interest group, which is happening. One of the knowledge sharing of the resilience interest group is happening today. So I will stop from here, and thank you very much again for your interest in this topic. We hope that you find this and the subsequent sessions useful for understanding transformational change. So with that, let me pass back over to JP so that he can introduce our distinguished speakers. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Laurie, for this useful introduction. I think it will help everyone to have a common ground for the discussion and the presentations that we're having later today. Right now we're about to enter the most interesting part of this session. We will hear from our speakers, to whom we're very thankful for their participation. And I will go ahead and introduce them. So today we will be hearing from Harsh Vivek, Siddhant Pandey, and Hitesh Kolcha on the experience of the IFC promoting private sector engagement. Harsh, we will be speaking first. He's an experience development professional, and he currently serves as the program leader for the South Asia Food and Agribusiness Advisory to the International Finance Corporation. And as program leader, he designs and implements innovative development projects, leveraging IFC's investment to make markets work for the poor. And his work mostly covers India, Nepal, and Bangladesh. Siddhant Pandey is the CEO of Business Oxygen, the first international SME venture private equity impact fund that has a climate focus in Nepal. He's an experienced banker with a lot of experience from the sector. And finally, Mr. Hitesh Golcha is the director of Golcha organization, which is one of the oldest and biggest corporate houses in Nepal. And he drove the project on climate resilience with the IFC to strengthen the supply chain of sugarcane and support over 10,000 smallholder sugarcane farmers. So without much else to say, but to thank you again for your kind participation, I will pass over to Harsh, who will be kicking out the presentation session.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar. And thank you to all the organizers for giving us the opportunity to share our experience on private sector development in climate change adaptation and agribusiness in South Asia. Could you go to the next slide, please? So South Asia is one of the most vulnerable regions when it comes to climate change impacts, and especially in agriculture. And the reason for this high vulnerability is not only in the quantum of the impact of any climate shock, given the high population, but also because of the endemic poverty in the region that limits adaptation capabilities of vast sections of the population, especially in the farming community. So any impact, whether it is flood or drought or pest attack or loss of soil health, beyond a point has a serious impact on the livelihoods of millions of farmers, smallholders, particularly in South Asia. And that can actually pose a fairly significant development challenge in the region. Next slide, please. So across the world, there's talk about engaging with private sector in promoting climate change adaptation. However, the jury is not out yet in terms of what really excites private sector participation in climate change adaptation. We have seen that for climate change mitigation, there is a much wider private sector engagement. But when it comes to adaptation and resilience, we do not yet have many examples, especially from developing countries, particularly in South Asia. There's still few and far between examples of what the private sector has done to promote climate change adaptation. So what's holding the private sector back in their participation for climate change adaptation and agribusiness? Next slide, please. So the challenge is for private sector to come into any venture, whether it's climate change adaptation, whether it's a new business model. What is important is to have a business case. And unfortunately, in a lot of contexts, a lot of agribusiness value chains, a number of small economies in the region, even large ones, the business case for private sector is not fully articulated when it comes to climate change adaptation. So what are the areas where the business case can happen? One is around risk mitigation. So there are climate shocks, there are climate risks, and going forward, we are going to see more and more incidences of climate-related shocks. So to mitigate any damage to the business from those climate shocks could be one of the risks. However, this needs a proper mapping of what the risks are and what is the likelihood of damage, the loss, and what could be done to mitigate. So risk mitigation clearly is one area where there could be a business case. The second area is that climate change adaptation also opens up new opportunities for private sector to innovate, to come up with new products, services, technologies, which can then be used to service new markets. But again, what is the quantum of the opportunity? Where does the opportunity lie? What are the investments required to tap those opportunities are not necessarily very clear when it comes to the private sector. So again, the business case is very critical for any private sector engagement. And business case means there has to be a return to the business. There has to be some kind of an ROI, for doing these kind of initiatives. What are the factors which constrain private sector? Some of them are endogenous factors, which are within the private sector. So say, for example, lack of awareness of the business case. The private sector may be operating, but doesn't know that there are these other opportunities that can be tapped, or there are these risks that can be mitigated. The other is maybe they know the business case, but there is lack of adequate capacity. So some of these are endogenous factors, and there are more, but these are some that we have encountered in our engagements with the private sector in the region. And there are a few exogenous factors, factors from outside the private sector, but in the system that actually influence how the private sector behaves. One of them is institutional framework or the support ecosystem. Sometimes there aren't enough products or policies which support private sector engagement in climate change adaptation in agribusiness. There's also lack of sometimes stakeholder action, and the private sector thinks that why am I the only one doing it? Why aren't the others coming in? So there is a lack of sort of collective action that promotes, or stewardship that promotes, business oriented climate change adaptation initiatives. A lot of these benefits actually accrue to not just one firm, but many firms. And therefore, then it becomes a classic collective action problem for the private sector to tackle. Next slide, please. So we've, in the IFC, we've implemented 2 pilot programs for climate resilience, one in Nepal and one in Bangladesh. And the Nepal program was focused on the offtake side. So we had 3 private sector companies that we worked with, and they were all off-takers. They were all buyers of what the farmers were producing. And the sectors were rice, sugarcane, and maize. And in Bangladesh, we were working on the input side. So they were working with seed companies, for example, who were supplying agro inputs to farmers. So between these 2 projects, we actually covered, from the input side and the output side, how private sector can actually support climate change adaptation. So below is a brief illustration of what the IFC does. So we work through lead firms. So lead firms are the private sector partners that we support as part of our engagement. And the support would come in the form of either investments. So IFC invests in these companies, or in the form of advisory services where IFC provides technical assistance and capacity building support to private sector partners for a development agenda. But in this case, the agenda was to promote climate change adaptation, technologies and practices with smallholders. So the idea was we work with the private sector, we build capacity within the private sector on the opportunities and risks in climate change adaptation, articulate a business case, demonstrate the business case, and then build a cadre of people who are like converted, who understand what this climate change adaptation is. They become the frontline people who then engage with smallholders in the value chain and further cascade the capacity and training and knowledge to the ultimate beneficiary, which is smallholders in the value chain. Because ultimately, the transformation has to happen at the farms, where farmers and smallholders are adopting climate smart and climate resilient practices and technologies. And that cascades then through the entire supply chain. So in a nutshell, that's the model that IFC comes in, works with the private sector, builds their capacity, and then the private sector goes out and works through the supply chain to transfer and disseminate that knowledge. And we believe that this is a good model because once the private sector understands that there is a business case, it becomes a kind of a going concern for the private sector. And similarly, if the farmers understand that the behavior change we are expecting towards climate change adaptation has a business rationale for them, either in terms of increase in farm yields or reduction of post-harvest losses or reduction in cost of cultivation, that power of that economics, the farm economics, is something that drives behavior change. The farmer is far more willing to then change practices and technologies once the business case is clearly articulated. Of course, there are environmental benefits, social benefits, but for a smallholder farmer who's struggling to make ends meet, I think the conversation also have to include what is in it for them in terms of economics. Next slide, please. So what did we achieve in PPCR Nepal? And I'll also talk about Bangladesh. We have 2 slides here. So in PPCR Nepal, as I mentioned, we had 3 firms. We worked with 19,000 farmers, of which 8,000 farmers were women farmers. And we had built capacity around adoption of climate smart and climate resilient practices, starting from resilient seeds to good agricultural practices, what needs to be done in case of a drought, what needs to be done in case of a flood, post-harvest management, the entire gamut of what it needs to take to make the farmer climate resilient. We've had some very good results under the Nepal PPCR project. For the sugarcane program that we did, and Hitesh will talk more about his experience because he was one of our partners, we had increase in farm yields at the farmer level. Now that itself becomes a very big business driver for the farmer to adopt climate smart practices. And this was done using resilient varieties, better agronomy practices, timely irrigation, better inputs, the whole gamut of what it takes. We demonstrated that, and a lot of lead farmers who we supported showed that there is an increase in farm yields. In case of maize, the second commodity that we did, unfortunately, there was a flood at the time when we were doing the impact assessment. And we realized that the extent of yield loss for farmers who were doing climate resilient practices was much less. It was 23% less compared to those who did not do climate resilient practices. So that flood basically, I wouldn't say that it was timely or, I don't want to say that, but the fact that there was a climate shock showed that, if farmers adopt climate resilient practices, the risk, there's a mitigation on the downside. They can actually cover their losses or mitigate or minimize their losses. For the firm, Hitesh can talk about more, there was a business impact in terms of increase in sugar recovery. Now, sugarcane business or sugar business is all around recovery. And that becomes very critical, if there are good varieties, good practices, tighter supply chain, the private sector sort of benefits through improved business efficiencies. Next slide, please. In Bangladesh, as I've mentioned, we are working on the input side. And we built capacity around use of climate resilient seeds. And in Bangladesh, the program was actually very unique, where the government mandated that we work only in the southern part of Bangladesh, which is the polder regions which are highly susceptible to inundation. And because of rise of sea level, there's been incidences of increase in soil salinity. And that had actually rendered a lot of conventional agriculture, unviable. And now there are actually innovations in climate resilient seeds which can withstand greater soil salinity, greater periods of inundation, which can actually support farmers to get back to agriculture on lands which were otherwise not fit for agriculture because of increase in soil salinity, increase in seawater ingress, and so on. Now, in this case, again, it was a very extensive program. We covered 90,000 farmers in this case across 3 different private sector companies. One was on the rice seeds side, again, a very important crop for Bangladesh. And the other was on potatoes, where we were looking at more commercial applications of potato processing. And here again, we had about 11,000 women farmers who were covered. So what happened as a result of the capacity building effort on climate change, resilience and adaptation? One was increase in farm revenue. So farmers and increase in farm yield. So the yields went up because there were seeds which were resistant to salinity, had high tolerance for seawater ingress and so on. So that really improved farm yields from what they would get in conventional agriculture. And also there was increase in farm revenue because there was higher produce coming in. Costs were more or less same because a lot of the inefficient practices were ruled out as part of the training program. And then for the companies, there was increase in sales revenue. Now, this is an area where the companies usually don't have, the private sector would not work in these very remote areas because they didn't see that as a market. But now with this project, they've found that there are farmers who are willing to buy these resilient seeds, and it's a new market. And again, there's a business case, therefore, to service that market in promoting climate resilient seeds. And finally, on cropping intensity, so a lot of this area that I was telling you was becoming unviable for agriculture. So the intensity was going down. It actually, the program increased farming intensity or cropping intensity because they could start to farm even in months where there was, where the farms were inundated or where there were high levels of soil salinity. What we did ensure is that farmers don't do monocrop. There was a crop rotation built in that actually helped farmers in making sure that they have a balanced sort of livelihood, and not just focus on one crop. Next slide, please. So what did we learn out of these two projects? The core of it is, of course, the business case, as I'd mentioned. For the farmer itself, for the behavior change that we're expecting them to do, to adopt new practices, it has to be on business case. The environmental, social benefits are very important and farmers are aware of it. But I think, when they're really struggling to make ends meet, it's the economics of the farming practices and that whole agriculture that needs to be front and central of the discourse with these farmers. Similarly, with the private sector, if you expect them to come and work in these very challenging areas over the long run and make investments, then there has to be some kind of a return. It needn't be very supernormal returns, but it has to be financially viable. So business case for all players in the value chain, I think, is front and central when we want private sector to come in. The nature of value chain also makes it different. So sugarcane, for example, Hitesh can talk about more. The tighter the supply chain, higher the control the private sector can have in influencing behavior change across the supply chain. Looser the supply chain, for example, in rice or in maize, where you have lots of intermediaries, where the firms are disconnected with the smallholders, their ability to influence behavior change is limited. Public policy can create a big incentive, and we've seen that. For example, in PPCR Bangladesh, if it hadn't been for the government to push engagement in the polder regions, I wouldn't, most private sector companies would not have really looked at that area to, service it over the long run. So there was a push from the public sector side itself that we are going to focus on our development efforts and our concessional finance efforts in the very challenging parts of the country. And then, through support from the PPCR, from CIF, we were able to demonstrate that, yes, it is possible for private sector to work in these very remote places. And I would finally, technology plays a very critical role. 90,000 farmers in remote Bangladesh, it's not easy if you do not have access to digital technology. And this is even before COVID really made it, the talk of the town, where everybody started to latch on digital, medium for extension, for knowledge sharing, for information dissemination. We started it slightly earlier, where we looked at ways by which they could be cost-effective ways of outreach for farmers, for training, for capacity building, for follow-on support, for information dissemination. So for example, we had established an automated weather advisory, a weather station in one of the polder regions, which actually provided a week's forecast on climate to smallholders who were part of that group to do crop advisory to respond. So basically making climate and weather as a decision variable and take proactive steps rather than take reactive steps to be more resilient. Next slide, please. This is my final slide, and I wanted to tie this back to the 4 pillars of transformational change that Laurie spoke about. And you'll see that across these 2 projects, there are, glimpses of each of these 4 dimensions of transformational change. So say, for example, relevance. The fact that, there is business case oriented interventions for the private sector, these kind of programs become very relevant for the private sector. And there is flexibility built in because, the business case changes. Not every private sector will have the same business case. The input suppliers will have a very different business case compared to output off takers. But the core remains the same, that there is a business case, there is an economic driver as to why a private sector needs to come in and take that risk, because there is a return. And that risk and return calibration, I think, if that is there, any such intervention becomes very relevant for private sector participation. For systemic change, we've seen in our programs that success begets success. Once some of these private sectors, and we worked with leaders in these markets, we found that once they start to demonstrate that there is a business case, the multi-stakeholder partnerships start to emerge. More and more players who are fence-sitters sort of start to come in and bring in innovation and solutions to push the needle, to expand the horizons of the engagement. Gender participation, we found that in the past, women, though they are working in farms, don't necessarily get targeted by any extension support. But when you're looking at climate resilience, and we find that women play an extremely important role in farming, and engaging them in decision making around what inputs to buy or what practices to do or where to sell starts to bring in that change of gender participation and recognition in these value chains. And I'd spoken about technology, how technology can actually reduce the cost per farmer to engage and provide information and track and do traceability and take proactive steps to mitigate any farm loss by maybe advanced weather forecasting. All of that is possible through technology. And these things together can start to push the needle towards long-term change. Scale, again, is very critical. And again, why would a private sector scale up? Because they see business in it. If it's a going concern, the private sector scales up. Because a pilot doesn't make sense for them. It only makes sense when it comes to commercial scale. But the pilot proves that there is viability. There is environmental sustainability, social inclusion, but also economic viability. And that sort of starts to engage the senior management of these companies to make more resources available for scale up. New technologies and products, I was mentioning climate resilient seeds, for example. That's a new area that comes in. And if there are markets to be tapped, new markets to be created, that scales up private sector engagement. And finally, sustainability. On sustainability, our approach has been that there has to be a triple bottom line. As I mentioned, economics, environmental sustainability, economic viability, environmental sustainability, and social inclusion. And you'll find that as long as all three of them are being impacted in some form, there is sustainability built in these programs. How we looked at sustainability from a very narrow IFC perspective, when you work with private sector and you demonstrate a business case and the private sector sees returns, given that that's the nature of private sector, that's the nature to run after opportunities where there is a return and risk-reward calibration, it becomes a going concern. When IFC even exits, you find that the private sector takes on these initiatives on their own and continues to work with different markets and newer markets. And that's a real sign of sustainability. If there's no business case, moment the funding stops, the private sector leaves it. But if there is a business case, if there are returns, if there is risk-reward calibration, the private sector really comes in with innovation, resource efficiency, and resource mobilization as well. They put in resources because that's where they see that there are avenues to grow their business, do the innovation and have a return. Maybe not supernormal returns, but yes, there needs to be a return for private sector engagement. Thank you very much. Next slide, please. Thank you.
Thank you very, very much, Harsh, for this really interesting presentation and introduction to the IFC's work. When we switch presentations to go with Mr. Pandey's presentation, I just wanted to bring the attention to the chat, where we are already getting really interesting questions from participants related to how to develop the capacities of the private sector or work in contexts where the private sector has limited capacity. Additionally, some of the operations or the most practical stuff on the projects that you've discussed regarding how to overcome challenges, such as the last mile, for example, and make these services affordable to farmers, and also some of the some questions regarding some of the challenges and opportunities that you found here, challenges in terms of the resistance or the effort that you had to do in order to engage farmers, but also some of the pre-installed capacity, the initial resources that were available for this program to be implemented. So I will just offer those initial thoughts for you, Harsh, so that we can go back to them during the Q&A. Now, Yolaudos will go to Mr. Siddhant's presentation. And just for everyone to know, we will play a short video regarding Mr. Siddhant's company, and then he will be presenting his slides. Thank you.
Energy as a service was the core idea behind starting Saraloja. BO2 investment came exactly at the time when we were about to implement PPA model, renewable energy as a service model, where we'll have to invest heavily upfront. Beside the investment, whatever they brought to the table was good, and we're following it, and our management practice has changed.
सरल ऊर्जासँग बसेर काम गर्दाखेरि समुदायको उन्नति हेरेर चाहिँ मेरो व्यक्तिगत तौरमा पनि परिवर्तन भएको छ। मलाई यो रोजगारी पाइसकेपछि चाहिँ अरु खर्च छुट्याएर त्यहाँ चाहिँ लगानी गरिरहेको छु, सानो पसल भए पनि।
Himalayan Chain Resort actually developed organically as we saw the need for better accommodation for our own guests from around the world. We practice responsible tourism that can be replicated in other parts of the Himalayas. One of the things that BO2 has really helped is to bring in corporate governance into the project. We are a family business, and so when you're running a family business, a lot of things are left rather casual. And the way forward is always for corporate governance, especially when you have so many lodges to run.
Bringing our home-cooked food to customers. So that's how we started Dalle. Since BO2 came in, they've helped us with the central kitchen, which was very important at that time, and we've grown in numbers from 3 to 10 outlets, and we hope to grow even bigger. We're trying to hire at least 30% female employees. 90% of our staff go to college.
अब 2-4 पैसा भए पनि आफूले कमाइरहेको छु, घरमा अब खर्च भइरहेछ, त्यसमा पनि आफ्नो खुट्टामा आफै उभिन सक्ने भयो।
SMEs are vital for economies like Nepal. However, this segment is the most neglected. They lack access to capital because they don't have security to give to the banks, so they haven't been able to scale up. That's where Business Oxygen has come in to provide that much needed capital as well as the technical expertise. Majority of the SMEs in Nepal have traditional management practices. Therefore, with our entry into them, we'd like to see them grow not only in their balance sheet, but ensure that they are in compliance with the rules of the law, as well as in compliance with climate smart approaches.
Thank you, Arya, for projecting the video. And now the floor is yours, Mr. Pandey.
Thank you. Can we have the, okay, thank you. Thank you, Sif, for providing the platform for BO2 to showcase its adaptation resilience projects. Next slide, please.
Sidan, you are muted.
Yeah.
All right, sorry.
Yes.
Sorry. Okay. Good evening to everybody. From Nepal, the least carbon emitting nation, but the fourth most vulnerable to it. The slide on the screen is of the Everest region. You notice the formation of glacial lakes. These lakes burst and cause havoc downstream. Climate change in the Himalayan region in the recent past is an attestation to the unremitting humanitarian infrastructure disasters due to it. Can we have the next slide, please? Okay. There are two ways of addressing this transformational change towards low carbon, climate resilient development, top down and bottom up. Both are interrelated, one at the macro level and the other from the micro level, which is engaging with the private sector. My remit this evening is to talk about it from the micro level and how BO2, the only climate-focused fund in Nepal, with CIF, IFC, and FCDO investments, is tackling this phenomena. I will try to link the transformational change in the dimensions of relevance, systemic change, and scale. Relevance is understood to be related to mitigate emissions and adverse environmental consequences while generating social benefits. Systemic change means that they are changing the mindset of farmers and communities and encouraging the adoption of climate resilient tools and practices. Next slide, please. You need to keep on, can you please just get everything on this slide? Yes, thank you. This is a snapshot of the 6 investments and its results that have come out. From our solar business, we have installed 3.4 megawatt rooftop solar systems, pioneering diversification into energy mix of Nepal under the renewable service company model, pretty much as a mini utility company, substituting import for thermal electricity. Converting 45,000 kgs of organic waste is from one of the largest biogas companies in Nepal that we have invested in, comprising of animal manure and municipal solid waste for the generation of green fuel, out of which 528,000 kg of compressed natural gas is produced per year, substituting 37,183 liquefied petroleum gas cylinders. This reduces greenhouse gas emissions. Now, our biopellet business produces 20 tons annually, converting 30 tons of forest waste per annum, demonstrating to mitigate the adverse impacts of climate change, reducing use of coal with renewable biomass pellets. It also removes bushes and shrubs from the forest, preventing it from potential fire hazards. This so far has covered 13,500 square miles. Again, it is reduction of GHG emission. And our other micro dairy businesses has enhanced supplementary source of income to 9,265 smaller farmers in the supply chain, 4,950 tons of organic fertilizer production from the organic waste complements has been produced from our biogas company. Now I'm going to talk about the individual companies and how they have been able to complement the climate, how the climate story can be complemented from our investments in the companies that I will mention individually. Can we have the next slide, please? Gandaki Urja Private Limited is Nepal's largest biogas and fertilizer company. It converts 45,000 kg of organic waste to 1,600 kg of bio-CNG and organic fertilizer. Building food security through production of 4,950 tons of organic fertilizer to boost agriculture productivity by utilizing improved practices, reduce carbon emission caused by waste, improving use of green fuel, replacing 528,000 kg of compressed natural gas are produced per year, substituting 37,183 liquefied petroleum gas cylinders, providing livelihood to 120 small farmers by collecting 45 tons per day of waste from small dairy farmers, which will help farmers generate an additional income of 1 rupee per kg. That means that they are earning $2.50 per day, where they would not have been earning any money at all if this biogas company was not buying biogas waste from them. The next company is a solar panel installation company. It's called Saral Urja. It distributes rooftop systems and off-grid community solar panels. Developing diversification to the energy mix of Nepal, rooftop solar of 200 kilowatts installed under RESCO model, and to increase 1.5 megawatts of funds investment. Current installed 200 kilowatts of rooftop solar plants shall displace 7,300 megawatts of energy through solar in 25 years, displacing thermal power generated that we are importing from India, which is basically spending $200 million getting dirty energy, which can, in the long term, if we can scale this product, we will be able to displace it by clean energy. Reduction of use of electricity generated from dirty fuels has been one of the biggest problems that we need to deal with. And unless these things are scalable, we would not be able to do it. Pumping water to rain-fed terraces for irrigation with the help of solar pumps for irrigation and sustainable agriculture yield. Market-based solutions such as post-harvest processing due to the facilitation of solar panels. Solar power panels have enabled cultivation of high-value crops, transformed livelihoods of smaller subsistence farmers. It has the potential to lift Nepali families from subsistence agriculture and poverty. Two examples, both of off-grid community-based solar panels. One is an 18 kilowatt installation in one of the poorest parts of Nepal, a little village called Dubong. And the other is another installation of 30 kilowatts in a village called Raksirang. The most rural parts, which has enabled market-based solutions such as post-harvest processing, which have been contended to improving energy utilization that add greater value to the farmer. Now, Dalle is a restaurant chain that we help create a central kitchen and scale up its operation from 1.5 units to 10 so far, and increasing. Because of the installation of the reduction of the installation of the central kitchen, there was reduction of food wastage and efficient management of energy used through centralized kitchen. It generated employment for 130 semi-skilled and unskilled youths of Nepal and promotes women youth representation to its workforce. 60% employed are now low-income household. It is the first private limited entity which has made its social mark by assisting trafficked women to be employed through a halfway house called Mighty Nepal and provide employment as a mission statement to reintegrate and create economic opportunity for these women. Reduction of food wastage and efficient management of energy use through centralized kitchen has not only just helped provide an efficient management system, it has also created backward linkages in the value chain where farmers have been able to get employment by providing their produces to the restaurant. Next slide, please. Bacchus Alternate Energy is, again, one of Nepal's first manufacturer of biopellets. It develops green fuel, which can displace the use of coal, 20 tons of pellets annually using locally available resources by converting 30 tons of forest waste per annum. Reduce forest fire risk in Sagarnath Forest, which is an area, a large forested area, which is owned by the government, which was vulnerable to forest fires in the past. Now, with this and the collection of the shrubs and the leaves, there is a system where the villages can earn some money by selling them by the kilos to the company, and the vulnerability of forest fires is mitigated. And this is also another way to mitigate the adverse impact of climate change through replacement of fossil fuel by renewable biomass energy. The main buyers of the biopellets are going to be cement factories, which are now using coal, and tea plantations, which also use coal to produce, to process tea. The fifth company is Godavari International, which produces hardened cheese, which in the West they call doggy chews. It created alternative source of income to farmers living in remote pockets of Nepal, working with 300 micro dairies in the supply chain, employing over 1,600 people and supporting livelihoods of 4,015 smallholder farmers, all of whom are low income, and the overwhelming majority are female. I might add that 80% of people displaced by climate change are women. We need to address this sector. They also trained 2 dairies to manufacture hardened cheese as per export market requirement, which helped the company reduce its processing cost, but as well as processing time and decreased product waste during processing by 20%. The dairies worked directly with 465 farmer households. The 6th company is manufacturing of beaten rice and puff rice. Company produces, company purchases paddy from 5,250 small farmers directly. Company has climate resilient storage capacity of 10,500 tons of paddy, protecting it from rain and moisture. The greater shelf life and demand of these products experienced during difficult times like the pandemic or post-disaster. Can we have the next slide, please? Now, moving forward, we need to find an approach between business development and environment practices, because we are a finance-first model. We are a private equity. We try to create climate-smart approaches to the investments that we enter, not as a byproduct, but as an intentionality. But as earlier was mentioned, it has to have a business case. It has to have commercial sense, and it has to have economic returns. So not all businesses are willing to get into, especially small and medium enterprises are not willing to get into climate smart approaches because the balance sheets don't really, can't afford it. So we try to approach this by showing backward and forward linkages. Awareness drive has to be created. You need to propagate that greening does have the potential to improve SME business performance by demonstrating that your supply chain can be secured. For instance, in the case of the hardened cheese, they were buying from so many farmers that even the remotest price change could have stopped the source of supply, and the supplier would go to another company. So in order to do that, we help them create a tripartite agreement with microfinance agencies so that they would have some sort of a binding relationship, and they would work to provide a secure supply. And with that, also creating capacity building activities in the villages and the micro dairies has created a secure pipeline for the companies involved. Now, as we have created biopellets, biogas, biofertilizer companies, we are a small private equity company. Now, if we can replicate and scale it all over the country, then that would be very meaningful. If one biogas company can provide about 20,000 tons, pellet company can provide 20,000 tons of biopellets, then if you can replicate that all over the country, that would make an enormous difference for mitigating the climate adversality through replacement or displacement of importing harmful carbon emitting energy products. How SIF can add value. Supplementary advisory support for fund managers like BO2 to build and scale up climate smart business capital to further grow bottom up approaches. Enable access to finance to blended finance approach. What we have realized is that in all these SMEs, if there wasn't a technical assistance component, then if you were just totally trying to approach them from a commercial aspect, it would not be sustainable. You really need to handhold these institutions. For instance, a poor farmer who's cultivating coffee does not know that the yield of coffee at 900 meters is not going to have the same quality of yield anymore because of climate change, and he would have to go to 1400 meters or above. These are the sort of interventions that are required in the future to deal with these sort of farmers in economies like this, to ensure that their businesses can adapt and are resilient to climate change. Next slide, please. As we say in Business Oxygen, let's breathe. I thank SIF for its support with BO2, and with its investments, we have been able to manage not 100%, but 127% accuracy in terms of climate financing compliance. And we have been able to directly address 6 companies that are providing that sort of impact with just $3 million. You can just imagine how much more can be done with a larger corpus and with the sort of training, capacity building, and intervention that private equity firms like us have been doing in this market. Not only has SIF provided technical support to these companies that we are dealing with, they have also provided technical support to Business Oxygen management and staff on training us on how to deal with climate resilience, mitigation, and climate smart approaches. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think Mr. Pandey's presentation helped us get a first glimpse of how all the interesting interventions that was mentioning before look from the private sector perspective. And just to complement this interesting share of thoughts, we would like to welcome our third and final speaker, Hitesh Kolcha, who would be also sharing some of his experience as a private sector actor working with the IFC. So Hitesh, go ahead, you're on mute.
Good evening, everybody. Thank you very much to IFC and the team for coordinating this program and giving me the opportunity to speak here. Let me start by a little introduction. You know, I come from a family business background, and I'm 4th generation in the family business. We face a lot of problems in our sugar mills because of these climate issues, and you know, it's a cyclical industry and so on and so forth. So one of the things was that, you know, I didn't want to leave this problem for the next generations, you know, of my family who is going to be taking over this business, hopefully. So this is when IFC had approached us, and I said that, maybe I can help the future generations by doing this climate resilient program. And the other reason was I had no idea what it was. So I thought it would be good to learn. With that, if you can please go to the next slide, I'll quickly share some experiences. The way I've done this presentation is the headlines that you see are the problems, and then what was the response that IFC team had proposed, and we took as in coordination with IFC. So the first one was obviously the climate shocks which happen. They have a very negative impact on the farm yield and the incomes of the farmers. So the idea was to make the farmers and the crop resilient to climate change. We also did capacity building of the field extension workers, which was training the trainers and so on and so forth. We also did a lot of demonstration, as Harshad mentioned, of demonstration, these farms and things like that, pilot farms. The second problem that we were facing was acceptability of new ideas among farmers. This was a very big challenge because as resistant as we are to change, farmers are 10 times more resistant to trying anything new on the field because they are worried that if anything happens to their crop, their entire capital and their livelihood for the entire year just evaporates. So with IFC coming in and training the trainers, this was, I think, one of the biggest achievements that we had, which we did not realize at the time, but it kind of shifted the farmer's mindset. And as I speak a little bit more, it will become very clear, why I say it with so much of conviction. They also did, while doing these trainings, they also trained the farmers on farm economics, of how to make more money from the farms, especially to the lead farmers, and then that could be kind of passed on to the other farmers. So that also helped a lot. Exposure to weather condition is obviously a problem. The IFC approach was, they helped us install a weather station, which gives a more real-time warning of the weather to the farmers directly on their mobile phones. So that was a great program, very well appreciated by the farmers, and it helps them to take timely action based on the response which they get on their mobile phones. Lack of human resource is, by human resource we mean the farm workers. This is a big problem in Nepal, and we did a exhibition kind of a thing where we introduced a lot of different mechanization which could also be used. Some of them were big, of course, and then some of them were also designed for the smallholders. Next slide, please. Lack of resource is a persistent and a consistent problem in Nepal. So we also did a lot of tie-ups with suppliers in helping provide the farmers with the right farm inputs. We were able to do this. There are a lot of questions floating that how do we do this with the small farmers? So it is very difficult. Just to quickly answer that, it is very difficult to do if we try to approach all these small farm holders independently. We were able to do it very effectively with approximately 10,000 farmers initially, and then extended it up to 25,000 farmers because sugar mills are like a nucleus. So all these farmers come to us, so it becomes very easy for us to kind of influence them and impact these changes. The smallholder nature of the farmer is a very, very big challenge, especially in terms of mechanization. So the response to that was a very interesting program, which we are now scaling up very rapidly. It is not only launch of affordable tools and machine to the program to the farmers, but also a rental program where the mill purchases these machines and then in turn gives it to the farmer. We have also developed micro entrepreneurs from the pool of farmers, who have invested, or who we have tied up with the government, and we've got some funding, and they have invested in machineries which are in turn being rented to these smallholders. So that's a very interesting program which is now picking up momentum. We have also done a lot of land pooling this year because sugarcane is very difficult to do on small pools of land, so we have convinced the farmers to pool their land together and do it as a big contract farmer, to become like a big contract farmer. So that has helped a lot. Exposure related to risk and pest attacks, this was something that we initiated, and the way we did this was with crop insurance. So this has been extremely successful. Uh, to really truly make the farms or the farmers, the crop climate resilient, and the farmers to be able to apply this, there is a massive need for funds. So what we also did was we tied up with the banks and we provided conditional microfinance to the farmers. So we tied up with 3 banks and we provided microfinance in the range of almost $5 million to the farmers. Next slide, please. So this is the result of all that I've spoken about. This is the result which happened. Bigha is our kind of, the size of the land. So you can assume hectare. The graph that you see is how the yield of the farmer increased. So from the time we started the practice in around 2014 to 2021, even after IFC had departed, the growth still continues in the yield per hectare. And this was done because of better seeds and everything else that we spoke about. Next slide, please. This is a very interesting graph. There was a natural decrease in the sugarcane, in the first 2 years while we were still implementing the ideas of IFC. But after that, if you see, the blue line that you see is the amount of amount of sugarcane that we received, and the red line is the quantity or the quantity of land which was covered on the sugarcane. So what you see is there is a big gap coming to year 6 and year 7. What that means is that we were actually getting a lot more sugarcane from much smaller area of land. Now, this is where the real result of the resiliency comes in, and it's evident with this graph. We actually ended up freeing up some land for other crops. So I think this was a very big achievement that we were able to do, and this gap is increasing every day between the amount of land that we have and the yield from that land which is covered by sugarcane. Next slide, please. This is how it converted into money. You see that climbing graph at the end is the recovery, what we call sugar recovery, which basically means the amount of sugar we get by crushing sugarcane. So this is per ton, or it is in terms of percentage, however you would like to see. So we have really increased our yield, our sugar recovery from the sugarcane which is coming from the farms, which means the crop is healthier. It has more sugar per hectare, if you would like. Could you have the next slide, please? So this is my last slide. The challenges that we face in Nepal, and I'm sure this kind of resonates across the region or in countries like Nepal, to truly make any crop, not just sugarcane, I think with our experience, any crop climate resilient, the biggest challenge is CapEx. Till we do not do irrigation, drip irrigation, greenhouses, tissue culture for better seeds, the crops do not become resilient. And to be able to implement any of these ideas, you need a very high amount of investments, which is not easy for the farmers to do. And even if you use the example that I've just shared with you of the sugar mills, though we act as catalysts, but beyond the point, we also have our own limitations of how much of investments we can do. And also in case of irrigation and drip irrigation, the farmers keep switching their crop from every 3 years. So sugarcane is a 3-year crop, so every 3 years they need to switch to something else. And to leave that kind of infrastructure on the ground is from our perspective, it's a little bit of a high risk, to say that. So while we are trying to achieve this climate resiliency in the crop, there are we've been able to reach to where we are quite successfully with the help of IFC. And I would say IFC was a impetus to, to things which have now been in a trajectory which is improving on its own. Number one, for our mill. And this mill has become an example where all other sugar mills in the country are coming and seeing what we are doing and trying to replicate it. Now, the challenge that they face, and why they are not able to do it very successfully, and I think I say it with a lot of conviction again, is because of the training that was provided by IFC to our trainers and the farmers. Because that without that mind shift, how much ever we push, even being the catalyst, it's generally very, very difficult, to implement because of the mindset of the farmers. Thank you very much. That's it from me. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I think this really interesting presentation really helped us kind of highlight some of the messages that we were anticipating from this session, right? That there is a role for private sector in promoting resilience, but that there is also a need to have clear business cases in order for this approach to kind of explode. Additionally, I think from the experiences that you all have shared, we've really getting some insights on how, while most of these stakeholders already intuitively understand climate risks and resilience, the adoption or the changes towards new practices really is encouraged when evidence of practical benefits is demonstrated. And finally, also that there is a very important role of public policy in incentivizing and enabling private sector engagement, and that this involvement has to really come from a bottom up approach in order to adequately resonate with all of the stakeholders involved. So I think having summarized or having gone back to these three messages, it would be good to start going through some of the questions that we've been getting through the session. I know most of you are interested in sharing your opinions and also hearing about speakers' perspective on some of the questions that you might be having. So I will start going through some of the questions, and please, if the person that asked the question wants to complement or add something after me, please feel free and go ahead to do so. So first question that we have comes from Kitembo from Zambia. And the question is, how can IFC help the private sector? In the case of Zambia, we're struggling to get participation of the private sector in adaptation and resilience building, because primarily of the low development of the private sector, issues of technology, financial muscle, and incentives to invest in adaptation and mitigation. Please note that we have a huge percentage of micro, small, and medium scale enterprises. So I don't know, Harsh, if from your perspective, does this sound like a familiar context, and do you have something to add?
Thank you for the question. I recall last year, or maybe last year, 2019, I think, Siddhant and I had an opportunity to visit Zambia, and we were in discussions with the stakeholders there, including SIF and I think PPCR, around what could be done for engaging with the private sector. And we also had the opportunity to bring in a speaker from Bangladesh who shared his experience on what was done in Bangladesh's context. So I think from what I have been able to understand is that each of these countries, whether it is Zambia, countries in South Asia, there is a private sector. The challenge is that, when we say that we find it difficult to find their participation, resilience, and adaptation, the challenge is that we've not been able to demonstrate or articulate a business case for them. The question is, why should they come in? Because, for whatever limited dollars they may have, or even if access to investments they may have, there are other competing, investment opportunities. So the way to entice the private sector is to go beyond to exhortation and request. I think it's about showing the opportunity, and the opportunity could be either in terms of increasing business or mitigating risk. And the more, through use of donor funds or public funding or concessional finance, we are able to demonstrate that there are these opportunities. This is how you can, tap newer business, or this is how you could mitigate your risk by working with a few exemplars in the economy. Like in Nepal, we worked with, say, Hitesh's company, or with BO2 or fund. We have to have few leaders who buy into the idea, use whatever resources we have to demonstrate the business case, show it that it happens, it can be done. There are returns to be made, there are risks to be mitigated. Once that becomes, clearer, you'll find that opportunities will start to emerge for private sector participation. Till the business case is not clearly articulated, till that is very nebulous, the participation is going to be, rather muted. So it's the effort, in the preparatory stage, we have to focus on finding the business opportunity and articulating it very well, that this is where the returns come in, these are the risks, this is how the risk reward sort of calibration works out, and then show it on the ground with a few, and then you will find that it spreads like wildfire. Thank you.
Might I add a little bit to that, Harsh?
Please, of course.
We were in Zambia. I had an opportunity to talk to a few of the members of parliament there on this special issue, and I talked about how they need to do more on trying to develop an entrepreneurial culture, create an ecosystem, because unless there is commercialization and an economic sense to any sort of venture, it is not sustainable. And unless it's sustainable, you can't even dream of thinking about climate resilience or adaptation.
Thank you very much. I don't know if Kitembo, you want to add something to this, or if we can go to next questions. So some of the question that repeats a lot on the chat has to do with how to ensure kind of accessibility for the small stakeholders, particularly farmers in this case, to the tools that have been presented. I already know that Mr. Hitesh presented some about the financing instruments that were used to engage with farmers, but I don't know if Harsh or Mr. Siddhant, you want to comment a little bit more on this, on how to kind of break the last mile challenges in reaching these vulnerable populations.
Maybe I'll go first. Then.
Go ahead, Harsh, please.
Sure. I would, so one example we found that to bridge, say, last mile connectivity gaps around extension, dissemination, traceability, climate, information sharing, was the use of digital technologies. And I think, COVID has, of course, as I mentioned in my presentation as well, has really made use of these digital tools quite all pervasive. But we had started even earlier on. And the idea was to work with ICT service providers in developing, tools and models which can actually, at a very fraction of the cost, reach out to a much larger segment of population with information, with the data around their farming practices, around the sales, patterns, and really providing them customized advisory and information around what seeds to buy, where to sell, what climate, impending, say there's a drought coming in or there's a dry spell coming in, then what needs to be done on the farms to mitigate losses or manage their farms. The technology through these mobile phones and their penetration in the rural market is really, I would say, transformed how we can reach out to a larger segment of the rural population at a much lesser, cost per farmer. So that's been an experience. We have a case study under development on what we've done in Bangladesh, and we'll be happy to share what we could do through ICT technologies for last mile support. Thank you.
I think, you see, we have two different kinds of companies. Out of the six, 5 of the companies that I talked about are totally climate concerned. They produce zero carbon emitting companies, and their value addition is to the supply chain backward linkages. They are there to support as well as benefit from the rural communities that provide the raw materials to them. Now, engaging with that is something that these companies have realized that it is a huge benefit to them. Now, the other side of our portfolio are companies that we introduce climate smart measures to, whether it's rainwater harvesting or using solar panels or renewing making sure that they use ESG platform to engage in their businesses. Now, that is a work in progress, but the ones that we have introduced these measures to have greatly benefited, not just from their interaction with the backward linked supply chain, but also with how they have been able to save money in their operations. Now, it is here that technical assistantship is very important. And like Harsh mentioned, digitization has come all of a sudden, especially after COVID, especially in countries like Nepal. It has shown that ICT technology can really benefit a company, but that is in itself very secular, I think. I think there are companies out there that you really need to go a little bit much more not in a digital way, but you have to have much more interventions to show them that what they're yielding and what they're doing can be beneficial for them as well as their buyers. Now, you need technical assistance support for that. Companies cannot afford to do that on their own. So that's why blended finance is a very important ingredient in addressing this sector.
Thank you. Is there anything you'd like to add, Mr. Golcha?
I think most of the things are covered well. My only thing for smallholders was there are a lot of very simple ideas which work very well, like the micro entrepreneurs that we are trying to develop to buy this machinery and lease it to them, the microfinance that we are doing. These are very small, easy to implement ideas, access to the right kind of fertilizer, training them on the nutrient and what is the importance of nutrient management, and access to seeds and things like that. Very, very simple things, especially in countries like Nepal. Even these basic things are lacking. So once we pick up these low-hanging fruits, then the mind shift happens and things start to kind of take shape on their own. That's it. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Then to follow up with a question from someone who is from Nepal as well. Ram Prasad asks if there are any kind of standard guidelines or steps developed for climate smart agriculture. His question is he's interested in such kind of tools so that the local level planner can accordingly act to climate resilience. So I don't know if you can offer some reflections on this particular product that he's referring to, but also another existing knowledge product that could help kind of reproduce these kinds of projects. So should we go ahead and start with you again, Harsh?
Sure. Okay. So thank you for the question. What we've done in our limited capacity is that, for all the three crops that we had supported, three value chains, rice, sugarcane, and maize in Nepal, we created like a step-by-step, package of practices on climate smart, climate resilient farming, and also on how to engage with farmers and women farmers and players in the supply chain. We did two things. One was that since it was the first time something of this sort was being done, we involved an institution under the CGIAR, an institution called Climate Change and Food Security, CCAFS. An entity which is within the CGIAR system, which is looking at climate change adaptation and climate change resilience. And we asked them to actually validate these package of practices because we didn't want to promote something as climate resilient or climate smart without it being vetted by the experts who are from these CGIAR systems. So that is available, and that we've shared with the government. And we've also engaged with NARC, Nepal's Agricultural Research Centers. And the idea was to bring in the state through these research institutions to, transfer this information, to them, and also do further demonstration and customization as required for Nepal. So that again is there. I remember we had done a paper on rice, which was very well accepted by NARC. And we also have similar material for sugarcane and maize, which we'll be happy to share. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Harsh. And then I think, well, we are now approaching the closing of this webinar. Just wanted to let all the participants that we've taken note of the questions that you've left on the chat, and we'll make sure to distribute them with the speakers in case we can get a response to them even after the session, as we think there is plenty of knowledge to be shared there. So thank you again.
Could I just wanted to ask one question to Hitesh. I'm sorry, I'm putting Hitesh on the spot. With your permission, Jose, can I do that?
Yeah, I think we can have a brief question before we
sure.
Close.
So Hitesh, you mentioned in one of your slides that there was a focus on crop insurance. And I was very pleased to see that because, you need insurance to mitigate against climate risk. My question to you is, did you find any difference in the way these insurance companies approached farmers who were doing climate smart, climate resilient agriculture? Or is it still too early to think that, those who are doing these resilient farming are going to have some kind of benefits on risk premium on insurance?
So I'll answer that, Harsh, as quickly as possible in like 2 or 3 parts. So the insurance companies are very reluctant to do this insurance. What we have done is we have tied up with the banks, and the financing only happens if there is insurance. That is done by us. It's not a banking requirement, but we have enforced that because we take the risk of the money that is given to the farmers. But what we have also done is we have convinced the government to give a subsidy on these insurances. So the insurance which the farmer gets is extremely heavily subsidized by the government. So the mechanism is working, but there is a little bit of reluctance from the insurance companies. It took us almost 2 seasons, for the insurance claims to actually start getting settled. So now the insurance claims have also started to get settled. So I think the momentum will pick up. We just have to be at it.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you, Tesh, and thanks Harsh for the question as well. Just wanted to thank everyone, the speakers and their participants, for your valuable insights and your fruitful discussion during this session. On terms of what's coming, we just wanted to let you know that later this month, we will be sharing a report on private sector engagement with insights from this TCLP session, but also insights from previous sessions that would held at other interest groups. And I wanted to remind you that, as Carolina mentioned at the start of the session, this is this session has been has been brought to closure the first stint of the Resilience AG for the 2020 work plan. And for the 2021, as you might probably have noticed on recent TCLP communication, there would be a new interest group on resilience and landscapes, and information on the activities of that group will be shared shortly. So if you would like to take part, please do not hesitate to contact us, and we'll make sure to include them into the communications. And then just briefly mention that if you're already on either of those groups, you will be enrolled to the communication lists automatically. And just before we say goodbye, I don't know if Laurie, I noticed you came in. I don't know if you wanted to say any closing remarks.
Yeah, thank you, JP. I just wanted to thank Harsh, Siddhant, and Hitesh for making themselves available to share their experiences and insights on this very interesting and very timely topic on private sector engagement in adaptation and resilience building. And we hope to continue this conversation with our speakers and provide very good learning opportunities for our SIF stakeholders on how to better engage and encourage the business sector to participate in some of the resilience and adaptation building activities. Thank you, and also thank you to all the participants for this session, for listening to our speakers. Thank you, JP.
Thank you very, very much. So I think we're a few minutes past the hour, so we can say goodbye now, and thank you all for joining today. It was a really interesting discussion, and please be alert of the products that we'll be sharing afterwards, including the meeting summary, the recording, etc.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Bye. Thank you.
I take care.